You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay. We are live, and how is everyone? I'm doing great. So, last time we met, we were talking about the Franklin scandal. And for those that don't know about the Franklin scandal, in 1988, authorities in Omaha, Nebraska, examined allegations of a child trafficking ring stemming from the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union. The allegations that were that the president, Larry E. King, was prostituting children to the prominent and powerful. Private investigator Gary Caradori was hired by the state of Nebraska to investigate, but unfortunately he died in a plane crash with his son in July of 1990. In May of 1994, a documentary about the scandal was set to air on the Discovery Channel, but was pulled at the last minute, only adding to this scandal's lore. It's really the holy grail of conspiracy theories, with inspiring two books, one by John DeCamp, The Franklin Cover-Up, one by Nick Bryant called The Franklin Scandal. And it's inspired a whole host of researchers, all dedicated to researching the Franklin scandal. But was the Franklin scandal a carefully crafted hoax, as the grand jury who sentenced alleged victim Alicia Owen to 9 to 15 years in prison for perjury concluded? Or was it a cover-up? And today we're going to look a little bit more at Alicia Owen's claims and what the grand jury concluded and why they concluded that she committed perjury. So, but before we do, I'm just going to take a quick break, and I'll meet you back on the other side of the break. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. So I wanted to look a little bit more at Alicia Owen's interview. They're very weird. And that's really, I never questioned this story, even with my history of falling for documentaries. I never questioned the Franklin scandal till someone close to me said, like, I just saw Conspiracy of Silence, the documentary that never aired. It's on YouTube for those that want to take a look at it. And this person close to me was like, I really, I just don't believe it. I think it's ridiculous. And I was like, that's interesting. It won't be the first time I was fooled by a documentary. So I started to revisit it. I'd read the Franklin Scandal book. I'd read both. I definitely have read Nick Bryant's book. And I believe I read DeCamp's book a long, long time ago. And rereading. So I started to look at Alicia Owen's interview with Nick Bryant, the first, and it was so odd. And in my experience of interviewing people, when you have a story to tell, you tell it. You don't spend a lot of time talking about, what did she talk about? Oh, the air conditioners, that she was convicted for perjury because the air conditioners weren't working great in the courthouse. Another one of her claims was that she got convicted because the jury was so frustrated with having to go through the metal detectors in court. Now, at Keith Raniere's trial, we had 2 metal detectors, so don't give him any ideas, Alicia, for his appeal. That's what I thought. But a lot of reasons, it's something. What I'm trying to communicate is that when you hear things that don't make sense, you should be asking yourself, why are they talking about the air conditioners? Why are they doing such a good job not talking about their case or the subject at hand? So I wasn't trying to torture you last episode with a lot of boring nonsense. I'm hoping that you will train your eye for interviews like this, where the person is going such a long distance to say so little. So we're just going to look at a little bit of Owens's interview, and then we're going to go right into the grand jury's conclusion, her court's conclusion, the jury's conclusion on her perjury trial. So let's take a look, shall we? Okay. So there's a lot of even more nonsensical stuff in the beginning of just chit chat. So let's start where he asks her what she thought of him, sort of like that actor's joke. What did you think of my performance? But here we go.
You were kind of guarded. Tell us a little bit about your first meeting with Nick Bryant.
I generally have a policy that I don't talk to the media or the press. Pretty much everything that I had to say, I had already said and said it on the record. And it was all there for anybody to, if they wanted to investigate, it was in black and white. And Nick, Ed had said that he had talked to you and that you were, out of all of the people that he had met, he thought you were a pretty good guy. And he asked, he advised that I should just meet with you, even if it was off the record. And I know that through various other means, and I knew that you had talked to people that I knew, and they had all said the exact same thing. So I thought, okay. Ed said, what can it hurt? I said, okay, I'll meet with the guy. And I remember that distinctly because it was in Ed's office, and Ed was sitting at his desk and you were to my right, and you started to talk to me about, and you knew a few things. And
exactly what we want to hear. There's seating positions, not what you talked about. What allegations were you afraid of? Why didn't you talk to the media? All those questions would have been good follow-up questions. Why were you so media shy? Did you have a bad experience in the media? What were you worried about? What particular allegations were you worried about disclosing? But instead we get very detailed memory of who's sitting where.
I was just cutting my teeth on the story at that point.
Yeah, so. And I kind of really, it seemed to me that you knew enough to know that something was there, but
according to an article I read, Nick Bryant was a science writer and he was looking to get into kind of more mainstream journalism. I believe he was writing I thought he had written for Rolling Stone at one point, but he was inspired by the documentary to look into this story. So I find that very interesting that he sees the documentary, and that's what, like every other researcher into the Franklin scandal, that is what sparked his interest.
You did not know everything. And I actually, I felt kind of bad for you because I thought this guy, really is, because in your podcast you have that one thing where you can't handle the truth.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, if this guy really knew everything, because it really is, I mean, there's like over 30,000 pages of grand jury testimony, let alone my trial, which is one of the longest criminal trials in the history of the state of Nebraska. There's
if not the longest.
Yeah, there's just so much documentation. And I just thought, guy, you have no idea what you're even asking for, and so I kind of felt sorry for you, and it still was a no. But I thought, I need to think about this. This isn't something, and I think I remember telling you, I don't think you know what you're asking for. And I remember thinking about it, and I talked with my family and some friends, and they were like, hey, he's been.
So I think the sound just went out there. It's what she's saying is that no sane journalist would take this, right? That's what she's saying. There's so much, it would upset the powers that be so much, right? No sane journalist would take this story without actually talking about the story itself or the allegations or any of the upsetting things.
Pursuing this, and by that time, even in 2003, I think you had already been to Omaha and already had some contact.
I've been to Omaha.
Yeah, and it was like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And
it only took four. I should say it took 4 years to give her. I kept on coming back to Nebraska, and people were amazed. He's still alive,
Yeah, he's still coming. And I thought, okay,
been scared off, and
he's still alive, meaning that the powers that be haven't killed him. I think that's what he was joking about, but I guess you could also say maybe the story had killed him or he'd gotten scared off by the story. But all those things, they're kind of just adding to the lore without really like, oh, it's a very top secret thing to investigate. It really ruffles the feathers of those in power, and you could come up in their crosshairs type thing, right?
I figured, I knew that you were crucial for the book, The Franklin Scandal. I knew that your trial was very crucial because it had to sanctify those grand juries that said that no children have been molested. And so you were a critical piece, and I think you understand this, going to Nebraska over and over and getting people to talk, it's like pulling teeth. It was like I was doing expose on the KGB during Stalinist Russia. I mean, people were very frightened to talk to me. A lot of people just didn't talk to me. And
right. So he's inferring that this is something that he's decided that because that anyone who didn't want to talk to him, excuse me, I had a cough. Anyone who didn't want to talk to him didn't want to talk to him because they were so afraid of the powers that be. So that's an assumption he made, when they could have a whole host of reasons why they didn't want to talk to him.
I mean, some people that had pretty high powered jobs in law enforcement, or in the Nebraska political arena, just refused to talk to him.
Well, and the crazy thing is, it was like 10 years after my trial, 10 years after the grand jury, and still it was.
Really? The police didn't want to talk to you? Because one of Alicia's allegations was that she was preyed upon by the chief of police and had his baby. And I went over those. We'll go over those again, but not only was she not able to identify any of the very serious scars on his body, he also provided DNA that did not match. And she was also telling people, her friends, when she applied for Medicaid for her daughter, that someone else was the father. So yeah, it became a problem. So I wouldn't imagine that the police, who don't have a great relationship with our press because our press tends to vilify them, I'm not surprised that the seasoned police officers didn't want to talk to Nick Bryant.
I believe me, I understood what the wall that you were facing, and really for me it was, you want to talk about venturing off into, you don't know what you don't know until you know what you don't know. And I felt kind of bad for you.
You got that? Nick Bryant doesn't know what he doesn't know. Or you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. Is that it? I don't know. Explain it to me in the comments.
This big galoot from New York, I mean, he's obviously pretty obtuse. He has no idea of what he's getting into.
But then I thought, okay, well, let's see where this goes. Because, what are they going to do? Throw me in jail again? I mean, why not? People need to know. And by that time, there was just so much evidence with like my trial and the misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, judicial misconduct, law enforcement misconduct. There was just so much evidence that I thought, okay, let's put it out there. Because, I mean, it's not like you can, during my trial and things like that, it was like, hey, most abusers don't give receipts. But when it came to my trial and the investigation, there were receipts. I mean, there were things that were in open court that you could prove. I mean, it was right there in black and white. And I thought, okay, we'll see where this goes. And so.
Okay. So let's look at some of those receipts, right? So she says abusers don't leave receipts. And that's true. But if that were really true, meaning I don't know if she's saying that you can't ever, I don't know, try a predator? I'm not sure exactly what she's saying there. I get, but you do leave receipts as you go through life, right? And our courts are founded on the idea that you can't be in two places at one time. You can have alibis. You can show receipts for where you've been. You have other witnesses, right? That's how you build a case. So she's making it seem like, it's impossible to ever verify this story. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, let's look at what the jury said about some of her testimony. Be right back. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Okay, so here we are with the State versus Owen 1993 decision, the state of Nebraska. So going over the facts. The trial of Owen lasted 5 weeks. The record contains over 4,000 pages of trial testimony and 182 exhibits, including approximately 11 hours of videotape testimony. Included in the exhibits are more than 1,000 pages of testimony from a previous grand jury proceeding related to Owen's perjury trial. Having reviewed the foregoing, we present a summary of the facts relevant to the issues raised on appeal. Okay, so this is answering her appeal. So it goes into like the whole history, how the grand jury was assembled, impaneled March 19th, 1990 to look at these, to examine the illegal activities of the credit union members. All right. So that's not in dispute. So, but it's important here. In testimony before the grand jury, 2 alleged victims recanted. Troy Bonner and Danny King recanted their videotape statements. They told the grand jury that the entire chain of allegations were false. The grand jury found that Bonner and Danny King had followed Owen's lead in making the videotapes and participating in the scam because they had believed, as had Owen, that the ruse would eventually lead to a lucrative book, television, and movie contracts. So for those of you who didn't listen to the previous episode, she met a man in a mental hospital. First, she got arrested and charged for passing bad checks. This is Alicia Owen. And then she committed herself to a mental hospital. In the mental hospital, she met what is described in court documents as a con man named Michael Casey, who was a Boys Town. Boys Town is started as a school for orphans, is now really a school for troubled boys and girls. And he had worked there and had been fired in 1974 for trying to do the same thing, steal Boys Town documents and sell them to the movie rights and book rights. And you'll see as we go on, they found letters between Owen and Casey talking about this idea of taking the Franklin scandal, which was at that time sort of a Ponzi scheme-ish collapse, fraud, basically, and attach it to this more salacious story of trafficking children. But this is very interesting. Okay. Furthermore, as had Owen, that the ruse would be eventually lead to a lucrative book, television, and movie contract. So that's what they're talking about. Furthermore, at the time the videotapes were made, Owen was serving a prison sentence for having passed bad checks. The Grand 509 jury determined that Owen had hoped that by stirring up controversy and then cooperating with authorities in the investigation of the alleged SA ring, she could obtain a reduced prison sentence or improved living conditions. Even absent the recantations of Bonner and Danny King, the grand jury found that the allegations of all 4 youths were lacking in credibility. The grand jury found that the story of SA, drugs, prostitution, and judicial bribery presented in the legislative videotapes were a carefully crafted hoax scripted by a person or persons with considerable knowledge of the people and institutions of Omaha, unquote. Owen and Bonacci, these are the two victims who would not walk back their claims and were charged with perjury. The two youths who stood by their videotaped statements alleging sexual exploitations were indicted for perjury. Okay, so this is the Casey connection. I'm going to skip through that, how she came forth with the allegations, and go right to the trial. In substance, Owen testified to the grand jury that she was certain that she had first met Troy Bonner and Danny King in August in 1983 at a party hosted by Larry King at the Twin Towers, an apartment complex at 30th and Farnham Streets in Omaha. Owen said a Boys Town resident, Richard Jeff Hubble, had taken her to the party, the first of many such parties that Owen, Bonner, and Danny King would attend at the Twin Towers. Owen told the grand jury that Robert Wadman, the chief of Omaha Police Division during the time period in question, and Harold Anderson, the publisher of the Omaha World Herald, during that same time period were participants in these parties. Owen reasserted all of these allegations at trial evidence. So at trial, the state offered the testimony of Hubble, who testified that he had met Owen at a dance one night in the summer of 1983, but had left the dance sometime before 11 p.m. and had never seen Owen again. Hubble said he had never taken Owen to the Twin Towers and had never set foot in the complex himself. He disavowed any acquaintances with or knowledge of Larry King, the police chief, the newspaper publisher, and the other people to whom he allegedly had introduced Owen at the party in August 1983. Bill Garrig, the friend of Owen, who testified that Owen had claimed to be working with Michael Casey on a Franklin investigation, testified that Owen had met Bonner for the first time in the summer of 1988 at an Omaha bar called The Run, which my understanding was that was a gay bar from what I've read. Interesting. Bonner corroborated Garrick's testimony that he and Owen had met in 1988, not 1983. The state also offered the testimony of the police chief and the newspaper publisher, both of whom completely deny any participation in or knowledge of the parties described by Owen. Details of the testimony of the chief and the publisher will be brought out in our review of the other counts that more directly involve those two men. So, okay, so here it is about the police chief. So so it sounds like, I mean, those aren't really, maybe if she was caught up in something powerful, people would deny it under oath, right? But these are just troubling things to me in this story surrounding particularly the judge and the police chief with Owen's story. And in the book, they never really get challenged. Instead, it's sort of a lot of other kind of minutia. Nick Bryant goes through Wadman's entire career as a police chief, his problems with the mayor, but he talks about how, but never really gets into these serious contradictions. Okay. So furthermore, so that they had met in the summer of 1988, not 1983. Furthermore, Bonner testified that he had never met Larry King. According to Bonner, the connection between himself and the alleged Twin Tower parties was the product of Owen's imagination. Bonner testified that he first became involved in the Franklin affair when Gary Caradori, the investigator for the legislator's Franklin Committee, contacted him in November 1989 and wanted to know all about the SA Bonner had suffered at the hands of Larry King and company. Bonner testified that he had no idea what Caradori was talking about. He would later discover that Owen had already made a videotaped statement for the investigator and had named Bonner as one of the victims of a child SA ring, SA ring, Excuse me. So after an initial phone call, Bonner met with Caradori in person. Caradori kept insisting that Bonner come out with the truth about having been SA'd. At the time, Bonner was still not aware that Owen had identified him as a fellow victim. Caradori implied that he already knew Bonner's story, but wanted Bonner to verify the details. In an attempt to introduce Bonner to reveal his own experiences of SA, Caradori referred to prominent Omahaians, including Larry King, and to incidents involving transportation of drugs and sexual exploitation with which he thought Bonner was familiar. Perhaps most importantly, Caradori told Bonner that within a year, Bonner could be receiving millions of dollars in civil damage awards and book and movie rights. So for those of you who've been really following this channel and my podcast, you'll know that that is how the wrongful conviction movement cleans up in our civil courts, not only with book money, movie money, but also in civil court awards, usually paid for by taxpayers for wrongful convictions, quote unquote, which I believe are totally rightful convictions. But in our civil courts, the bar of evidence is much lower. So here, Caradori is fishing it out to Bonner, like, hey, you could have some really great civil suits around this, around what's happened to you. And in Nick Bryan's book, he describes, he says that they were engaged, Bonner and Owen. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's sort of argued in a roundabout way that Owen couldn't have met Troy Bonner in 1988 because in July of 1988, when they were engaged, her mother, Alicia Owen's mother, thought that they had been together for a lot longer than just recently having met. So, meaning like they had to have met in 1983 because anybody who saw the couple together thought that they were so simpatico that they had to know each other for longer. I don't know about that. But yeah, there's there's a big problem with any of the claims made before from 1983 to 1988, substantiating them with as far as these people knowing each other and where they were at. And you can see that in Caradori's notes. He's talking about, well, Alicia Owen is telling him his story. He's typing it up, and he's typing up the discrepancies. He's saying, wait, she's saying Peter Citrone was at a party with a 7-year-old boy on his lap, but he didn't arrive with him. This little 7-year-old boy came later. Well, how did he arrive? She's saying that she first met Troy Bonner at this party with Hubble that in 1983 that they went to at the Twin Towers. But first she says that they all came in Troy's car, and then she says Troy came later alone. So there's, the court wasn't the only one seeing these discrepancies. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, rest my voice, and I'll catch you on the other side of the break. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Okay, so let's get back into why she was charged with perjury. Okay. So on count 4 and 5 of perjury, right? Count 5, so count 4 alleges in substance that Owen testified to the grand jury that sometime in September 1983, prior to her 15th birthday, she was essayed by the Omaha police chief at a Twin Towers party. She reasserted the allegation at trial. Count 5 alleges in substance that Owen testified to the grand jury that a series of sexual encounters between herself and the Omaha police chief began September 21st, 1983. The chief would pick her up once or twice a month on Wednesday afternoon. So pick her up from school. She was in school. And with the chief, so pick her up once or twice a month on Wednesday afternoon and drive her to a motel in Council Bluff, Iowa for a sexual encounter. This happened 20 to 25 times. The encounters with the chief ended in September 1984 when Owen became pregnant. Owen insisted that the chief had fathered the child. She reasserted these allegations at trial and claimed that some of the encounters occurred at motels in Bellevue. Evidence. The police chief testified that he had never met Larry King in conjunction with community action, programs aimed at reducing crime in the area of Omaha served by Franklin. He recalled seeing King socially on 3 occasions, but never at the Twin Towers and never at the type of parties described by Owen. The chief stated he had been inside the Twin Towers one time to address a meeting of either the Urban League or the NAACP on the subject of community relations with the police. The police chief testified that he had never met Owen. He testified that he had given blood samples to 3 different laboratories that had conducted DNA testing, and that all of the tests had confirmed that he was not the father of Owen's child. Eventually, a paternity suit against the chief was withdrawn. Great question for Alicia Owen. Why did you withdraw your paternity suit? But she knows that Nick Bryant's not going to ask that question because he's either a true believer or he knows that there are problems with her story. Not sure which. Owen testified to the grand jury that the police chief was in good physical shape with no surgical scars. Given their many sexual encounters, Owen said she would have noticed any scars on the chief's body. The police chief had been shot in the left arm while working as an undercover officer in Arizona in 1973 as a result of bone graft surgeries to repair the damaged arm. The chief has a noticeable scar on his left forearm from a large irregular incision running approximately from his wrist to his elbow. Surgeons had removed bone from the point to the right hip for use in the bone graft in the left forearm. The removal from the hip left a very large, quote unquote, and quote, easy to see, unquote, scar that extends from around the front of the chief's right hip. At her perjury trial, Owen offered a very detailed description of the police chief's body from head to toe, but did not include the surgical scars described above. She dismissed as unconvincing a series of photographs of the scar on the chief's left forearm and refused to believe that the chief's left arm was 50% disabled. She said she never saw the scar on the chief's right hip. The state pointed out that Owen did not name the police chief his father until several years after the child was born. The state introduced testimony by several witnesses whose claimed. So this is linked in the description of this episode, but I wanted to go through it to show you that I'm not making it up. I understand, I do look at recantations with suspicion. It is suspicious that so many people recanted their statements. It is odd, but this is an odd story. What can you say? So there's major problems with that. Goes on to talk about, so this is also, I think, a very interesting claim on that gets debunked here. Okay, count number 6, alleged perjury. In substance, Owen testified to the grand jury that in March 1984, the police chief removed his gun from his shoulder holster and penetrated her, blank, I'll leave that blank, with the barrel of the gun. Okay? Put the gun inside her. That's what she's saying. At her perjury trial, Owen testified that at these motel trysts, the chief always had a gun either in his shoulder holster or tucked in the waistband of his pants. The police chief testified he did not own any holsters, right? But that's just the police chief, right? We can forget him. But how about the person that worked under him? Special Agent Mott testified that according to records obtained by the never carried a gun. Okay, wait, hold on. And that the chief's personal secretary also testified that she had never seen him wearing a holster. But there's also one other person under him who testified, I believe, I may be wrong about that he did not carry his gun in a holster. So it just goes on this idea that she was assaulted by a judge at a French cafe. Her description of the person who ran the cafe resembled nobody who worked there. She talked about a woman named Sheila. She even gives her last name to Caradori, describes her as a big woman. And here you can see that a woman from that French cafe testifies that she's been working there since 1974 and no such person works there. So what do we conclude from this? I really don't know. I mean, if Owen is the crux of the case, then no, I don't believe the Franklin scandal. And what's kind of interesting is that the Franklin scandal likes to attach itself to a scandal of a male prostitution ring led by Craig Spence, who committed suicide right before this. So was that the inspiration? Or if, to fully satisfy the conspiracy theorists in my audience, right? I guess you could look at that. Or is the Franklin scandal what you call like a limited hangout? Is it to sort of release some kind of information about Craig Spence, but mainly to get you looking elsewhere? Is some of this true? Was Alicia Owen a grifter who kind of latched onto some real claims from some real victims? Really hard to know, but here's actually, you know what? I'm going to take a break. I'm going to come back with like just an interesting tidbit in this story when we meet back from the break. Stay right there. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Okay, I think I have Foxybot. Thank you for the $1.99 super sticker. I appreciate it. I hope you're doing well. Okay, before I just wanted to go into this one really interesting thing. I found it's also linked in the description of this episode. So Lyndon LaRouche is a political cult And they covered the Franklin scandal. And this is from a paragraph from their writing about it, right? So they talk about Owen's trial is highly irregular. The jury trial of Miss Owens, charged with 8 counts of perjury, is now in progress. She has been threatened with 356 years in prison if she does not recant her testimony against the Nebraska pedos. Okay. Her attorney, Henry Rosenthal, dropped a quote bombshell unquote at her opening of the trial May 20th, announcing that he had received a threatening phone call on May 18th from the star prosecution witness Troy Bonner. Rosenthal asked Judge Raymond Case to enter his tape of the call into record. Maureen protested that this was irrelevant to Owen's trial, and Judge Case agreed with Moran. Moran further tried to impress the jury as the court recovered after lunch, walking in with 5 police bodyguards and raving that, quote, supporters of the defendant, that's Alicia Owen, unquote, supporters of the defendant, unquote, that's Alicia Owens, that's me talking, had harassed and physically intimidated him during the break. He claimed one man asked him if he was sleeping with the grand jury foreman, Flanagan, and another man, quote, jostled, unquote, him in the hallway. The prosecutor raved that he refuses to be intimidated by, quote, Rosenthal's people, unquote, and said he might have them jailed. The judge then admonished Rosenthal. Rosenthal protested that the judge was not concerned about him being threatened, yet admonished him for alleged incidents involving people he didn't even know. Moran, continuing his tirade, replied that he knew who the people were. Quote, they work for Reverend James Bevel, unquote. Bevel, a civil rights leader active in opposing the pedos, was in the courtroom to observe the trial along with the Nation of Islam leader, Dr. Alim Abdul Muhammad, and Heisman Trophy winner Johnny Rogers. Eyewitnesses said it was Moran himself who provocatively bumped into an associate of Dr. Muhammad in the hallway. So we know what side Lyndon LaRouche's people are going to be on. Obviously, the defense is side right and be critical of the prosecution. If that wasn't obvious from that piece of writing, I don't know what is. But what's interesting is Reverend James Bevel got accused in 2008. So he's there watching this trial, right? Of his daughter accused him of abuse, and he was convicted in 2008 of these kind of crimes, believed related to his daughter. So isn't it interesting that he's in the courtroom championing on Alicia Owen? And what is the Nation of Islam? They are making an appearance. Just thought it was fascinating. But if you're interested in this story, we can go through some of the other witnesses, but I just wanted to bring it up because I don't think this is a story that ever gets questioned, because who would be, besides me, would be crazy enough to question it? Because it really makes it look like you're siding, right, with the powers that be, the silencers, the bad guys, right? And they always throw out that quote, like this was a carefully crafted hoax, like that decision came out of nowhere. And certainly courts can be wrong, but in my experience, they have to base their decision on something. Something led them to that conclusion. And I encourage everyone to read the court's findings in the appeal documents linked in the description of this episode. And I think that's what I have for today. Have a great one, everybody, and I will see you back next time.